Now it's time for another Board Game Brawl preview with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. In fact, it just relaunched with a much improved format on Kickstarter. That game is called BrilliAnts, and that's BrilliAnts, get it right, and that is from the company Sphere Games. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this paid preview video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page and find out even more information than I could possibly tell you here. There's going to be a link down in the description section of this video right underneath the video, and then also you can click in the top corner. There's going to be a little pull down card there that you click on. You'll follow the link, go to the Kickstarter project page, and find oodles more information, images, videos, and so on. Now, what is BrilliAnts? This is a competitive, moderate weight Euro game. You and the other players take control of a colony of ants, and you are trying to be the best ant colony possible by spreading out as far as possible and taking as much territory, taking resources, and making your colony stronger, breeding more ants, breeding different types of ants. In gameplay terms, you are trying to get different objectives that are going to get you, what else? Points. With those points, you're going to try to win the game by the end of the game. Of course, there is more to it than that. So let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played. I'm not going to go over every single little thing, but I will give you at least a taste of what the game is like. And of course, this is a prototype version of the game. So what you see there may not be what the final product ends up, necessarily looking like or playing like, but for the most part, it's going to give you an idea of what you can expect. Then we're going to come back. I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, I'm going to give you a brief look at BrilliAnts. This is a competitive game for 2 to 6 players, and you can also play the game solo with a special solo scenario. The goal of the game is to raise up your ant colony and become better than all the other ant colonies, and in gameplay terms, you want to have the most points by the end of the game. The end of the game is going to be triggered via these objective cards. Now, the objective cards are the main way that you're going to get points during the course of the game, and those are also going to trigger the end. So when, depending on the number of players, 8 or 9 objectives have been taken, that's going to be the end of the game. Then you figure out who has the most points. This is the point track, by the way. And whoever has the most points at that point is the winner of the game. Now, I do want to reiterate what I already said just before the overview, and that's that this is a prototype version of the game. So a lot of the different components that you see here, while they may look similar to what the final version is going to look like, they may also change as well. And even some of the gameplay rules may change too, so please note that as we go along through the rest of this. Now, one of the important things to note about BrilliAnts is that depending on the number of players, the gameplay can significantly change. If you play a 2-player game, it's supposed to be like a basic mode of the game. As you increase the number of players, the gameplay not only gets more complicated, but it also changes fundamentally. So for instance, if you were playing a basic game of BrilliAnts, you would actually keep each of the types of objective cards separate from each other, and then players would draw from each separate stack. However, when you play in this mode of the game, you actually shuffle all of those cards and objectives together. That's just one example of how gameplay can change depending on the number of players. Also, the board is going to change. So for instance, this is a setup for a 4-player game. So, for instance, this is the setup for a 3-player game of BrilliAnts, and while each board is going to look at least somewhat similar with a lot of the same types of elements, like all of these different resources out on the board, you are going to have to cover up some of the different areas with these large hexes, signifying that for less or more players, you're going to have more or less area for your ants to spread out amongst. So while we're focusing on the board, let's talk about it a little bit. As I said, all of these are considered resources. The resources are what you want to gain in order to gain all of these objectives. When you can, for this scenario, I should point out, when you meet the types of objectives on one of the cards that is out here on the table, you're going to be able to claim that. And anytime you see one of these golden leaves, that signifies points. So when you claim that objective, based on the requirements of it, you're going to gain those points. So it's very important for you to use your ants to go out onto the different hexes and gain those resources. However, only certain ants can get certain resources. We'll get back to that in a moment. Speaking of those ants, there are areas around the board marked with a 1, which indicate where your ants can come out of. In other words, your ant colony is underneath these sections of the board, depending on which player you are, and that's where your ants are going to get to come up to the surface. Other things of note, these tiles over here are for when players want to make new ants. They're essentially egg tiles. And note that there's a different silhouette for each of them, signifying the different types of ants: the soldier, the farmer, and the engineer. So depending on which tile you choose to take during the game, and we'll get to that, you are going to be able to take, depending on which tile you get, you're going to be able to breed one of those ants. Speaking of that, and this is also according to the different types of ants, you have different weather patterns that are going to influence movement rate of the different types of ants. Now, one player each round is going to be given the day and night tile, and that's going to be flipped from day to night to signify the different types of actions that the ants can take, or to signify their day actions and their night actions. But also, whoever holds that tile in the round is going to spin the spinner, and wherever it ends up, that particular type of ant is either going to get a +1 bonus, or if it lands where the question mark is, that player gets to choose which ant is going to get the bonus. So if it landed here, the soldiers would get +1 to their movement. If it was here, the farmer, and so on. Now, a couple of things you can do in the game to make it a little more complicated, but perhaps also more strategic, is give yourself special powers. Now, you have these special types of ants which say that your type of colony breeds a special type of ant. So, for instance, these types of ants can use day or night cards regardless of whether it's actually day or night. These special cards, which we'll also get to in a moment, which you may or may not also play with, have these moon and sun symbol up in the top corner. If you are this type of ant, you can use them regardless. Whereas for another example, the strategist ant here, it depends. This one depends again on the number of players and how you're playing with the objective cards. But in the experienced mode, where the objectives are laid out, this lets you look at the next objective card. Somewhat optional thing I'll tell you about. Again, these are the types of things you can play with if you want a more experienced game, are these special cards, which I already alluded to. If you choose to play with these, you deal 5 of them out to each player, and then you're going to draft them, which means you take a card, pass the rest around, and keep doing that until each player has a brand new hand of 5 cards. You can play these at any time when their special ability applies. In the back of the rules booklet, we'll give you a cheat sheet as to what all the special abilities can do. But for instance, I'll show you a few of these here. Some of the cards give you bonus points when you collect a certain resource. So when you collect this type of dirt with your engineers, if you play this card, you get 2 special bonus points. This card is one of the examples of moving the predators, which I'll get to in a little bit. But this one lets you move the spider in particular. So there's one of those for each of the different types of predators. There are cards like this that can affect the movement of each of the different types of ants. So this one's going to give +2 movement to a soldier ant. And excuse me, I apologize. Soldiers are actually called hunters. I was just getting the name confused. And finally, there's a lot of different cards, but the last one I'm going to show you for now is this card, which, as an example, lets you birth an ant. It uses your birthing action for the round, which is what this icon means, the just say no icon, but it allows you to birth this specific type of ant, which is also a hunter. Now, speaking of actions, let's get into the thick of it here. So, on each round of the game, players are going to take turns taking actions. And each player has 3 actions they can do during the round. So, the round is going to end when each player has taken all 3 of those particular actions. You alternate taking these actions, and you can do them in any order that you want, so long as you eventually perform all 3 of them before the end of the round. And when everyone has, that is the end. So, for instance, one of the actions is birthing ants, which I already alluded to. Now, every player is going to have a player board, and you have a stock of ants over here of the 3 different types. You've got the hunters, the farmers, and the engineers. And each of the ant tokens has a day side and a night side, signifying, you'll flip it over, signifying when you've used the night and day actions. At the start of the game, you're actually going to start off with 3 ants of your choice. You pick the 3 that you want of any combination and put them at the top here in this special chamber at the top of your board. But if you want to gain new ants, well, that has to do with grabbing these tiles, which I mentioned before. You're going to take one of those tiles as your action for the turn, and you only get to do this once per round. Take the tile and put it on your board, signifying that it can't be taken by anyone else for the round, and then you're going to birth that type of ant, which then must move out this round. The next type of action is moving one of your ants. You get to take one of your ants that is available to move, which is either a birthed ant that is in this chamber up at the top of your board, or one that is already moved out onto the board, and you are able to move him up to 3 spaces, and wherever he ends up, he's going to collect that type of resource if it applies to him. So, for instance, that's actually an engineer, so that's a bad idea. But if I moved a farmer up here and then I moved him a couple more spaces and stopped here, I would be able to gain a mushroom resource. And of course, there are whole stacks of tile resources that you'll have off to the side, so you will take the applicable resource when that happens. If it was a hunter, you would take one of these different other insect resources that are out on the table, meaning you've hunted down that type of creature, and now you can bring it back to the rest of the colony. And remember, gaining all these resources is in service, mechanically speaking, of getting all of these objective cards, and therefore getting points and potentially ending the game and being the winner. But another type of resource is dirt, and that is something that the engineer does and does very differently than the other players. When the engineer digs for dirt, he's going to move down through these different areas on your player board, and then take the applicable type of dirt, or potentially go through these 3 numbered areas up here, and that is going to enable you to build more holes, different types of holes that you can put out onto the board to give yourselves more options for spreading out into the above ground world, and therefore perhaps encroaching on your opponent's territory and so on. Now, one important thing I haven't mentioned quite yet is that whenever you take a resource out on the board, you are also going to put down one of your colony's pheromone tiles. This signifies that you have expanded your territory a bit in the world. The last type of action is moving the predators. Now, when you move the predators, this is the tile on your board that reminds you whether or not you have actually taken that action or not. So you'll flip this over to its no side to signify that you have moved the predator, and then you were going to take one of these happy fellows up here. These are 3D printed miniatures to give you an idea of what the final ones will look like. You're going to take one of these happy fellows and put them out on the board, and they will have different effects depending on which type of predator it is and where it ends up. They also have different movement rates. So, for instance, the grasshopper. What the grasshopper is going to do, he can actually fly and jump really high, so he can go to any tile located on the main board. But where he really wants to go is a plant or a mushroom. Once he gets there, he eats it up, and you have to put an empty grass tile out onto the board. Now, you might ask, why? What is the purpose of moving these predators? Well, that's to strategically impede your opponents. And they'll be doing the same thing to you, so you got to keep that in mind as you move your own predator. The next is the spider. Now, when you move the spider, it can go really fast. So it can go to any tile located on the main board, and if it goes on a tile with an insect, it eats it. And that's where you put an empty ground tile over one of those. And then finally, the worm, who's the most unpredictable of the predators. It can move on any tile located on an individual player board, not just the main board, except for those 3 upper left tiles, which are the ones with the numbers, which is where you can build the extra tunnels. And the nasty thing about that is that if he goes onto one of the tiles with dirt, he just basically tears it up and makes it useless. So once every player has taken all 3 of these actions, and therefore it's time for the round to end, everyone is going to reset their predator token. The day-night marker is going to pass to the next player in row, and it's going to flip over to whatever side it was not on before, day or night. And that signifies that you can now use the day and night actions of for instance, the special action cards. The player will spin the dial again, signifying different weather patterns. And then you take your actions, and it is not only as if a new round has started, a new round has started. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, the game is actually going to end when a number of objectives, depending on the number of players, either 8 or 9 objectives, is taken by the players. And once that happens, everyone gets to complete all their actions for the current round, and the game is going to end. Now, in addition to the points you've been gaining throughout the game for objectives and for some of the special action cards that you've played that give you bonus points, you also have a few extra chances to score as well. First off, for every pheromone that you have out on the board and for every nest that you have out on the board, you're going to get an extra point. Also, you may have wondered what these cards are here. These are bonus cards. Whoever has the most of each type of objective is going to gain the 3-point bonus cards, which gives you just a few extra points to potentially put you over the top. Whoever has the most points when you've added all of these numbers together is going to be the winner. If there is a tie, it's whoever has the most unused resources. They have stocked up for the long, cold winter, as ants are wont to do. Now, that is just a brief look at BrilliAnts. There's a lot of other things I didn't get to, but that should give you a gist of what the game is really like. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. Well, definitely the most notable thing about BrilliAnts is the fact that it is about ant colonies. Now, to be fair, and I've been surprised by this, there have been a number of games that have fallen into this category in the last few years, but the fact is, BrilliAnts feels very different than those. I've played those other games as well, and first off, this one takes a much more lighthearted approach to this theme. It's got very, sort of lighthearted, family-style, cartoonish artwork to it, and very bright and colorful and very well done at that, which means that it's really going to appeal to a wider audience. And despite the fact that it has this very lighthearted theme and artwork to it, that sort of hides a pretty in-depth game with a lot of strategy behind it. And I think that for those reasons, BrilliAnts is really going to succeed, because it has this theme that you can immediately jump into and these visuals that immediately grab you, especially when you see the final version of it, I'm sure. But also, there is a game here. There's a very tight strategic game here where you are trying your best to get all of these different resources before the other players do. And more importantly, you're vying for these different objectives. And again, as I pointed out in the overview, this is going to change drastically depending on the number of players and the complexity of game that you want to play. And that's another interesting part about the game too, is that you can decide how complex you want the game to be, which makes it very customizable to your play group, to the people that you want to play with, whether you're playing with younger gamers, older gamers, hardcore grognards, whatever it might be. People that you want to play with, that want to play at a certain level, you can adapt it to that style. And when you do play with all of the different advanced rules, with the special action cards and with the special ant abilities that each player can have, you really start to feel the depth of the game, but it never gets too much. It is still an easy game to learn. You can be up and running with this game, again, depending on the scenario, in less than 10 minutes easily. And the setup is very quick for the game as well, depending on, even with the different boards and the different types of layouts of the hexes, it doesn't take that long to set up at all. The game has a ton of different options, the ways that you can choose to go about the ants that you choose right from the very get-go. That's your first major decision, but then what you do with the predators, which is another very interesting aspect. These things that all players can potentially have control over, but you want to try to use them to your strategic advantage the better than the other players possibly can. What workers you decide to continue with, when you decide to pivot and start working on something else, like with your engineer and getting the different dirt samples. All these different things have to be taken into account, which I suppose I'm saying it and making it sound more complicated than it actually is, because again, this game is very streamlined and you can easily jump right into it. But for those who are seeking more of a strategic bent to it, you can find it here as well. So I do think that this game is going to appeal to a wide variety of gamers, people who are into that sort of lighthearted theme, or even people who might necessarily be put off by it at first. If they try it out, I think they're going to be surprised. And if you're someone who you think you're going to fall into one of those categories, definitely go to the official Kickstarter project page. The link will be down in the bottom of your screen, in the description section. And also, if you click on the card up in the top corner, the little eye icon there, that will pull down a link that will take you to the official Kickstarter project page. Find out more information. Like I said, I can't hit everything in this video. I can just hit the major points, and you can fill in the gaps there at the Kickstarter project page and find out whether it's a project that you want to support. So that is BrilliAnts from Sphere Games. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.